As you know, I was a vegetarian before I was a monk. In those places there was no vegetarian food. The other pot was a pot of pork curry. Something delicious at last. The immediate thought, this was very rare, how can we have 2 pots this day? I thought, I know why. The Devas are celebrating my enlightenment. That's the only explanation. So they had these 2 pots of curry. Now in the monasteries, the senior monk takes their share first of all, then they pass it down to the second monk, who passes it down to the third monk. Even though I'd only been a monk for 4 years, I was number 2 in line. And I saw this abbot, who was a local boy born in that village, who I thought should like rotten fish curry. He turned his nose, sniffed at the rotten fish curry. He wasn't going to have any of that. And he took 4 whopping ladles of this pork curry. Greedy pig. That's what I thought, I must admit. But I thought, it doesn't matter, there's plenty left for me, because I'm number 2, I'll soon get some. And then what this fellow did, I couldn't believe. Having taken 4 big ladlefuls for himself first, then he poured the rest of the pork curry in the same pot as the rotten fish curry, stirred it up and said, it's all the same anyway. What do you mean it's all the same anyway, you hypocrite? If it was the same, you'd have mixed it up first before you took yours. Oh, I was so upset at this monk. Because what really gets me is hypocrisy. He says one thing and does another thing, and worse, he spoilt my celebratory... I thought that it hit me. Arahats are not supposed to get angry. Arahats are not supposed to worry about what they eat. I was, and I was angry too. All my anger completely disappeared. So did my worry about what I ate. Realizing I wasn't enlightened after all, spoiled my whole day. That was when it only lasted for a few hours, such a shame. But it was the anger and the disappointment which proved to me, no, I wasn't enlightened after all. Thank you so much for that, Abbot, for teaching me about enlightenment and making me angry. Because that's how you find out. If you've still got defilements inside of you, you are not enlightened. If you've got anger, or craving, desire, you obviously aren't enlightened at all. That is how you find out. You watch a person over all those years, especially when it's a time they should get angry, or should get afraid. Once when Ajahn Chah, he only went to the West once. He went to England when our monks first went over there. He insisted going on alms round in Hampstead. He was walking an alms round, and this, well, you call him a yob, this young delinquent, came up to him and started teasing him because he was wearing girls' clothes. It was a dress, isn't it? We wore skirts. And in England they thought that was girls' clothes. And Ajahn Chah just kept on walking. And then this young man punched Ajahn Chah. Just past his nose. Wow. Ajahn Chah didn't know he was trying to miss. Then he tried to kick him. Again, just missing him. And Ajahn Chah afterwards, he just didn't move, he just carried on walking. Because he was a great monk. He said afterwards, I'm going to send all of my monks to England. This is a great place to test monks out. Of course, it only happened that one time. But that's where you find out if someone's enlightened or not. And sometimes it's very hard to tell. There was one of these cases in Sri Lanka, in probably the best meditation monastery some years ago in Mitrigala. If any of you know that meditation monastery, it's still there, but it was very, very strong, powerful monastery when the previous abbot was there. I think it was Veneranda, I think his name was, if I remember it correctly. This very interesting case happened because there was a couple of monks with me who were there at the time. There was a couple of temple boys who were working in this monastery, Because this is what boys do. They work in a monastery, they get accommodation, they get food, and they go to school at the same time during the day. So if they come from a poor family, at least they get some support. But these two boys were actually very interested in the Dhamma. So they went up to see the teacher one day and said, listen, we're not just here studying, we'd like to hear the Dhamma, we'd like to meditate. Can you give us some instructions on meditation? Now, most temple boys in Sri Lanka are notoriously lazy. So this was quite something, that the temple boy, or two of them, wanted to learn meditation. So this great, the most famous meditation master at that time in Sri Lanka gave them some meditation instruction. And these boys did very well. After another couple of weeks, they came there, reported their progress, and it was really encouraging. So the teacher gave them more instructions. These two young men started getting very deep in meditation and getting all these amazing insights. Soon the word was going around the monastery that these two boys were streamliners. The teacher confirmed it. Soon they become non-returners. And they said, the monks who were there at the time said, you couldn't believe the electric atmosphere in that monastery when the teacher confirmed they were both arahat. Two young boys must have had enormous good karma, paramitas, that together they got this highest attainment. And all these monks said, what a wonderful thing, we've got two more enlightened beings in Sri Lanka to teach the Dhamma. And they're so young, they can do so much for the world. According to the tradition, which is believed in Sri Lanka, if you become enlightened as a layperson, you've got till the next dawn to become a monk or a nun, or you die. So as soon as Venerable confirmed they were arahats, he actually ordered a car. He drove to the main monastery. In Sri Lanka, it's so difficult to get an ordination. He went to the main monastery, got out the preceptor, and demanded an ordination on the spot for these two young boys. He was convinced they were fully enlightened, and if he didn't ordain them that day, there was no time to waste, they would die. And it'd be such a waste for the Buddhism. So, on a very, very rare occasion, I don't know if it's happened before, these two boys were immediately ordained as bhikkhus. So it was novices, I think they were young, novices. They were put in the robes. And everyone was so inspired. Two more arahats in the world. However, we found out later on they weren't fully enlightened. Because what had actually happened, because they were just, the word got around, people came to look after them. One of these temple boys had a very minor ailment. One of the doctors, the supporters from Colombo, came to see him and said, look, it's a very simple ailment, but we can cure it. We just have to take you into a hospital and do a little operation. Now this was it was a boy from the village. He didn't understand what operation was. He didn't understand about anesthetic. He thought that you just cut things out with a knife when you're just sitting there or lying back on your back. He started to get afraid, very scared. And that made it very clear the boy wasn't an arahat after all. Soon the other defilements came up, and they were very disappointed that both of them eventually, they found they weren't enlightened. But the point of that story, their experiences were so close, they fooled even the greatest monk in Sri Lanka at the time. Now this is actually a warning to everybody. Sometimes it's so hard to tell who's enlightened or not. Sometimes you have to live with a person for many, many years. There are signs, obviously. They don't have greed, they don't have hatred. They're very wise, they're very peaceful, they never get angry at anybody. They live very simply, they've got few possessions like Ajahn Chah. It's very easy to tell a person is not enlightened. That is easy to see. But to say a person is enlightened, you have to check for many, many years. Even for yourself, you have to check for many, many years. If lust comes up, sorry, you're not enlightened. If you get angry, no. But where that enlightenment actually comes from, to link it from yesterday's talk, the enlightened process, when I say seeing the Dhamma, It's actually either seeing the Four Noble Truths or seeing impermanence, especially seeing the emptiness called non-self. That's why the first stage of enlightenment is just a purification of your view, seeing non-self to its very core. What actually happens is that the two causes for stream winning are the words of another, in other words, the teachings of a Buddha or their disciples, plus this word yoniso manasikara, the work of the mind which goes to the source of who you think you are. What I call the doer and the knower, will and consciousness. That's the source of you. I mentioned yesterday, the creator of this world is craving, coming from delusion, dependent origination. It's a craving which drives evolution, which changes species. That craving is beyond that craving called the doing, your will, that's one of those sources. And the other one is the knowing, the knower. This is where we have the delusion of we existing. Well, the Buddha said, you find these five khandhas, the body, feeling, perception. You find mental formations, in particular will, and consciousness, knowing, is not me, not mine, not a self. That is the attainment, the wisdom, the insight which makes one a stream winner. What happens is that because of your deep meditation, you see these things which you took to be a self. You see your mistake. It's like the blind spot. At the time you can't see it. You think you understand anatta, you think you understand suffering, you understand impermanence. But you're missing something. It's like a fellow monk of mine. He was a Vietnam vet in the US Marines. He fought in the front lines of the Vietnam War. In one occasion, during the fight, he was shot in the back of the head. The back of his head caved in. Fortunately, he was evacuated very quickly in a helicopter, taken to the Marine Hospital. I think it was in Tokyo at the time, or maybe Okinawa, where he woke up being operated on. When he came to, he was back in the US. He had got very little memory of what happened at this time. Because he was a Marine, a tough guy. The doctor said, I'm sorry son, you're going to be blind. Because his brain was damaged, they took out all this dead brain stuff in the area which is supposed to dominate your visual sense. He told me that he decided as soon as he had the chance he was not going to live as a blind person, he was going to commit suicide. He'd resolved on that, and he was so tough he would do it without any problem. However, when they took the bandages off his eyes, to the doctor's surprise, as much as his, he could see. His vision was not impaired. So, as soon as he was healthy enough to leave the hospital, he was outside of the army with $1,000 a month pension, which at those days meant he could do whatever he wanted. He went all over the world, enjoying himself, young, fit, attractive, having fun. But he said, and this is one of the reasons I tell this story, he was playing baseball with some friends. And the batter hit the ball high in his direction. It was a catch, there for the taking. He followed the ball with his eyes to catch it. And he said the strangest thing happened. The ball disappeared from the universe. It vanished. And he couldn't believe his eyes. But then, a second or two later, it reappeared along its trajectory. He realized from that experience and from others coming afterwards, he had a blind spot. The wound had actually destroyed part of his field of vision. But he said it was a strange thing to know that when you have a blind spot, you cannot see it. A certain area in your field of vision should be a black hole, but no, perception fills it in with what it expects to see there. he could actually, perception saw the sky just as you expect to see. But he never expected the ball, so actually the ball disappeared. And that's the only way he found out he had a blind spot. If any of you had a blind spot, you don't know it, except by inference, because your perception, your mind, fills in what it expects, what should be there. And that was my wonderful simile for delusion. You have a blind spot in your understanding of Dhamma, especially self and non-self. You simply can't see it. And you don't know you can't see it. Later on, with deep meditation, you notice that blind spot. You find out there was something you took to be you, a self, which had no reason to be taken as you. You see all the five khandhas completely in every which way. It's not me, not mine, not a self. Those insights are like explosions going on in the mind. Just like that insight which I had, which I thought was enlightenment, which wasn't, after 4 years as a monk. Just incredible peace, incredible happiness. You think you know everything. Just like an explosion. All your delusion seems to disappear. But you have to wait until the dust settles before you know if any of those hindrances and defilements are still there. Sometimes it takes months, even years. You've got to wait to see whether there is any self-view left. When you see non-self, emptiness, you also see the far shore. That is the insight which makes one a stream winner. When you know there's no one in there, and I really mean no one, only then can you start to let go properly. It's impossible to let go when you think you exist. You cannot let go. Because you is what does the attaching. I mentioned this earlier in another talk. Sometimes we think of attachment and grasping as what we pick up on that end of the hand. We never really look at what's doing the picking up and the attaching. If you see what's doing the attaching and grasping, it's you, the self. As long as there's a you there, an idea of me, you will always be grasping on something. The only way to unwind the cause of samsara is to abandon, see through the delusion of self. When that is abandoned, the whole process of samsara unravels. You have 7 lifetimes at most. If you're slow, once you see non-self to the full, a stream winner. Because there's no self in there, it's not a part of your choice. You can't will it to go faster or slower. You can't will yourself, oh, may I stay much longer in samsara. It's not up to you because it wasn't up to you to begin with. There is no self or will in there at all. There's no self actually willing. Because of that, 7 lifetimes at most. The closer you go, the more you let go of, the closer you are to Nibbana. And finally, you completely let go of everything. There's no self. You're not holding on to anything anymore. No anger, no ill will, no lust, no desire. Which means that when you pass away from this world, everything stops. Ceases. Sometimes people always ask that question. When an enlightened person dies, where do they go? The Buddha answered this very clearly. He said, when a flame nibbanas. The word for a flame being extinguished is called nibbana. The word nibbana in the time of the Buddha was understood by every villager. It was a common term. It was a term they used when the oil lamp went out. When a flame goes out, where does it go? Does it go to the unconditioned realm where all flames go when they go out? Does it go to flame heaven? Does it go to the non-manifest flameness? Does it go to the ineffable home of all flames? When a flame goes out, it doesn't exist anymore, that's all. Because the Buddha made this very clear. A flame depends upon three things. It depends upon the wick